Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I know it's kind of a weird location to be filming in, but I know I hadn't put up a video in about a week or a little over a week. But I wanted to talk about the Canon R8 and the Canon R7. I've been looking at these two cameras and I've noticed that they're priced pretty competitively. Both of them happen to be $1,500 each. And it's kind of interesting that Canon went this direction with having an entry-level full-frame camera and a powerhouse of a Super 35 APS-C camera at the same price point. So if anybody's looking at either of these two cameras, maybe you don't already have a mirrorless camera, or you're coming from an older, maybe a DSLR or a entry-level camera, and you're looking to upgrade, and you're looking at either of these two cameras, and you want to stay in, Canon's ecosystem. Hopefully this video kind of gives you some assistance in figuring out which one might be best for you. This won't be a big, in-depth video, but there are a couple key differences clearly between the two cameras besides just the fact that one happens to be full frame and one happens to be APS-C. The Canon R8. The Canon R8 is the entry-level full-frame camera for Canon going into 2023. It definitely is a good camera. There's no bad camera that's been released in the past, 3-4 years. But it definitely is watered down from the Canon R6 Mark II in a number of ways. One being the fact that there's no IBIS in the camera. So if you're somebody that wants to use your camera in a run and gun scenario and having that image stabilization is important to you, just know that the Canon R8 has no IBIS. I do believe you get E-stabilization like you did in the Canon R, the original camera, the original Canon EOS R, but you don't get IBIS in the Canon R8. Another thing with the Canon R8 too is that you don't get dual SD card recording. And for somebody that's looking to possibly, land jobs with their camera, maybe eventually go full-time or, do professional work, and you need redundant recording, the Canon R8 does not have this feature. So that's pretty important to consider. I don't do this full time. I have done jobs here and there in the past. I do like having a camera with dual SD card recording because I don't want to have to worry if a memory card fails. I know it doesn't happen very often, but God forbid that it does happen that one time, you definitely want to have a backup. Another thing that it doesn't have that the R6 Mark II has and the Canon R7 is I believe it's called the LPE6 battery. So the battery life in the Canon R8 is going to be, I wouldn't say poor, but it's not going to be as good as the Canon R7 because it's definitely using a bigger and more professional battery, unlike the Canon R8. So you're going to have shorter run times. So just keep that in mind too. You probably want to pick up a couple of batteries with your Canon R8 if you're going this direction. And then the other thing too is that it has no mechanical shutter, which is a very interesting direction that Canon went with this camera. I don't think there's any other camera besides the Canon R8. Maybe just the Nikon Z9. That's the first camera I think that went without a shutter. So if you're somebody that's looking to use this for high-speed sync photography, you drop the shutter a lot, just know that that could affect your image because you're going to have that first curtain shutter, and the electronic shutter is very fast, but having a mechanical shutter does have its pros. And I do think that in the future we're going to see more cameras with less and less mechanical shutters, but as of right now I just would keep that in mind looking at this camera. Then the other thing too is that the camera uses the Canon RP style body. So yes, you have 4K recording in this camera up to 60 frames per second, which is awesome at a $1,500 full frame camera. But you are using a smaller body and it doesn't have any sort of active cooling, technology into it or incorporated in it. And so that's going to probably make the camera overheat pretty quickly. Now, I haven't touched the camera. This is all speculation and just, my opinion. So take whatever I say with a grain of salt, but just having that smaller body style though, leads me to believe that the recording limits are going to be, depending on your environment, you're probably going to overheat that camera more quickly than like the Canon R7 or a Canon R6 Mark II. So with that in mind, if you are looking for a full frame camera and you don't mind the fact that it has those features taken out of the camera or those compromises with the camera, then the Canon R8 is probably the camera for you, because you are saving quite a bit of cash just getting a $1,500 full frame camera. And it's a great value proposition for anybody that wants to get into the full frame Canon ecosystem. But if you are somebody that really doesn't want to break the bank, again, $1,500 still isn't a cheap camera, no question about it. In this kind of market, $1,500 is considered affordable for full frame cameras. So with that in mind though, don't rule out the Canon R7, because the Canon R7 is a powerhouse of a super 35mm camera. Now, I tend to prefer full frame. I mean, obviously I think a lot of people do. Not saying there's anything wrong with Super 35, Micro Four Thirds, whatever. But I know a lot of people prefer full frame. However, if you are somebody that is a run and gun shooter, you want IBIS and you want to do more, jobs, gigs, or maybe go full time, start a business and do more professional work, having the dual SD card recording in the camera, I think, is a really big feature to think about. I know it doesn't happen very often, and I know there's, data recovery services out there, but it's just something that I think about too. Like if I was going out and shooting for a client or, doing something for, a business or what have you, I just wouldn't want to have a camera with one SD card slot. Now, I know you can. I know plenty of people have done it, of course. I mean, back in the day, I think a lot of cameras only had one SD card slot, but if you have the option to go with two SD cards as opposed to one and, back up your recordings, I mean, that's a very, very solid feature to have. And I would encourage you to go with the R7 in that regard, because you definitely want to have that available to you if you're going to be doing more professional shoots. Again, if full frame is really important to you, I would say maybe save up a little bit more and go with the Canon R6 or even a Panasonic S5 Mark II. But that being said, the Canon R7 is no slouch, even though it's a super 35mm camera, APS-C, whatever you want to call it. The Canon R7 does have a higher megapixel count than the Canon R8. That doesn't really matter too much to me if you're looking at making larger prints. Maybe you're a wildlife photographer. In that case, I mean, you probably already know that you want the R7 over the R8 just because you've got that 1.5 crop on all the lenses you use. And, having the Canon R7, having IBIS, that alone makes it awesome for run and gun style shoots. And if you're balancing on a gimbal, you get that added benefit of having really good IBIS. And I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm of the opinion that a camera that has a smaller sensor generally has better IBIS than a full frame camera. Now, again, the R8 doesn't have IBIS, but I think the Canon R7's IBIS is probably a little bit better than the Canon R6 Mark II and the Canon R6. So, that's something to think about as well. Yeah, I mean, overall, you can't go wrong with either of these two cameras, but I would say if you're somebody who's just looking for a full frame camera, you're more so, an amateur or an enthusiast, or maybe you're just using it for, webcam applications, or you want to create, videos online. You don't need backup recordings, then the Canon R8 is a great option, no question about it. I'm not going to bash that camera in any way. I wouldn't. I think it is a phenomenal camera for the price point. It's just you gotta think about these things too, depending on your use case. So the Canon R7 also has a killer feature that I don't know if the Canon R8 has. The Canon R7 has a wireless live streaming feature. I can't remember who I was watching. They were demonstrating the fact that it does live stream wirelessly from the camera as long as you're connected to a Wi-Fi network. And I don't know if you can connect it to your phone and use your phone as a hotspot to get a signal. I don't know if you can do that. Maybe that's not correct, but I know the Canon R7 does have a wireless live streaming feature. I don't know if the Canon R8 does. That might be something I'll have to look into, but yeah, I would love that feature. That is the one thing that I think about with the Panasonic S5 Mark II. The Panasonic S5 Mark II X that's coming out in a couple of months does have a wireless live streaming feature, which I think would be really awesome to have. Not a necessity, but of course it would be cool. So if you are, you know, a live streamer, maybe the R7 would be a great option to go with too. But if the R8 has it, yeah, that would be that'd be pretty awesome. I don't think the R6 Mark II does, but I'll have to take a look. But anyway, with that being said, you definitely want to look at both of these cameras and really identify what you're intending to use them for. Don't dismiss the R7 just because it's not full frame. I know I can be a little bit of a full frame snob. I don't try to dismiss sensor sizes. I think you can take, you know, great video or great photos with whatever, you know, sensor size you have. I mean, I've taken good photos with an iPhone 6 back in the day, so don't dismiss a camera's abilities just based off its sensor size alone. So for that $1,500, if you're looking to do more professional work, like I said before, or you're trying to pick up gigs, don't dismiss the R7. Maybe if you're a real estate videographer or photographer, you might want to go with the I would say probably go with the R6 Mark II. I mean, your budget's probably a little bit higher anyway. You know, you've got the dual SD card recording, like I said. You don't have to worry about the fact that you only have the one SD card slot. Yeah, the R8 has the 4K 60, so you can slow that footage down. One thing about Canon though, and this is the thing that kind of confuses me, is, well, there's two things. The more affordable cameras, even the full frame ones, but also the, you know, the APS-C style ones, there's no cohesiveness or consistency with the controls and the, you know, the dials, the buttons on the bodies. Because I feel like if you're trying to make, you know, if you're trying to get people to, you know, get into your ecosystem, I would think that you'd want to make it consistent across the board. I understand, you know, certain features are available in higher end products, of course, but I would just think that you'd want to keep the dials and controls consistent across the board. Like, for example, the Canon RP and the R8, they have that smaller body style, and I understand it's smaller. And then with the Canon R7, you've got the joystick up at the top, where on the Canon EOS R, it was like a little touchpad thing that nobody really liked. So yeah, I mean, I actually kind of like the decision they went with the R7. I know some people were kind of iffy on it, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense if all of your bodies are different types of controls or different. There's a different tactile feel. You've got the buttons programmed, like, you know, your muscle memory is configured to this body. You know, I would think that you'd want to make it pretty consistent across the board. But that's something that confuses me about Canon. The other thing too is they seem to not have the lineup of sweet spot lenses, and what I mean by that is, yeah, they've got the affordable 35mm, the RF 35mm, you know, the 85 f2, the 16, and they've got those kit lenses. I think they have a 70-300. It just seems like Canon doesn't have that, like, middle of the road awesome lenses that some of the other manufacturers do, like Sony, you know, Panasonic with their S-line series primes. Even Nikon has some pretty awesome prime lenses. I'm not saying that the primes on the RF system are awful, but they're clearly not as good as like the ones in Sony and the ones in Panasonic and the ones in Nikon. So I think Canon, if they're gonna block out all these third-party manufacturers, which I think is still a little crazy, I mean, I get it's something kind of like maybe out of Apple's playbook. I would think that they should build up these middle tier lenses for a lot of users. That's something to consider too. So, you know, if you're looking at either of these two cameras, just consider what use case you're going to be using them for. I think you can't go wrong with the R7. I don't think you can go wrong with the R8 if you're not a professional, or if you're not somebody that's trying to do gigs or jobs where you need that redundancy. But other than that, yeah, I would go with the R7 personally. With that being said, I really appreciate you guys checking out this video. I know it's a little different of a environment from my previous videos. If you like what you see and you're interested in camera, tech, video gear, you know, what have you, feel free to leave a comment and subscribe, and let me know if you're looking at getting one of these two cameras, or even if you're looking at getting a completely different camera. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you later.